You're watching Morning at NTV.
Hello there. Good morning. Welcome to Morning at NTV. My name is Malaki Vilodera. Now today on Kickstarter, we'll be talking about something that happened yesterday, but I don't think you got wind of this. And this is the reconciliation between CCEDU and the EC. And so to break that down and to tell us what you'll be expecting in the coming days is Mr. Crispin Kaheru, who is the CCEDU coordinator. And CCEDU is the Citizens Coalition for Electoral Democracy in Uganda. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mala.
I'll start with reading this particular press statement, and this is after you had a closed-door meeting between you and the EC, the Electoral Commission.
Right.
And I'll read it through. Now, the headline is, meeting held on the suspension of CCEDU's election-related activities. Now, it says, in the meeting held yesterday between CCEDU and the EC, both parties resolved to immediately renew their partnership and adopt an agreed-upon communication strategy. The Electoral Commission will in due course formally communicate on the renewed engagement and cooperation.
Yes, precisely that. And indeed, the Electoral Commission yesterday evening also put out a statement to the same effect, to say that yes, we're now embarking on a process of working on modalities that will improve our work methods, both the Electoral Commission and CCEDU on our end, just to make sure that there are no gray areas as we work together. Because while performing the election duty that we do perform, we work hand in hand with the Electoral Commission, because it's the only election management body that we have in Uganda.
Right.
And therefore there is no any other alternative. So we have to work with them. And I think one of the things that seems to have actually come out very clearly out of the meeting we held with the Electoral Commission is the sort of an unclear understanding between ourselves and the Electoral Commission with regard to how the Citizens Coalition for Electoral Democracy in Uganda works or operates. I think on one hand there was a thinking that CCEDU is supposed to restrictively report to the Electoral Commission when, for instance, it observes elections. And yet, our constituency is rather different. It's the citizens of Uganda, and that's why we're called the Citizens Coalition for Electoral Democracy in Uganda. And that imposes a double reporting mandate. In as much as we are supposed to, of course, turn in reports to the Electoral Commission, we are also supposed to keep the citizens for whom we watch elections on their behalf posted on what is happening in each and every election activity that we go out to observe.
Okay, all right. And just to clear the air, yesterday, why was the meeting just between CCEDU and the EC? And yet when the two of you went apart, we saw that you actually rallied together with other stakeholders to call for the EC to actually rethink their, their move to suspend your accreditation. Why was it just between the two of you and not with the stakeholders who helped you to get to this point of dialogue?
Well, I mean, yesterday's meeting was a culmination of a series of events. As you very well know, that some time back in July when the Electoral Commission suspended CCEDU, we invited a meeting of different stakeholders, most especially the membership of CCEDU, to think through how we need to respond to the suspension. Now, the membership meeting that we held actually came up with resolutions, things that we are supposed to take forward. One of them was to actually make this a subject matter before the courts of law, to seek the intervention of the court. That was number one. The other was to bring it to the attention of the Parliament of Uganda that, well, we exercise oversight over elections on behalf of citizens, and here is a suspension that has come to us from the Electoral Commission. And the other third action was actually to engage in a dialogue process between ourselves as CCEDU and the Electoral Commission. Now, I'll give you an example. The membership meeting that we hosted to come to these resolutions was a membership meeting of about 500 people from across the country. including different election stakeholders, of course, political party heads, civil society heads. The media was represented, religious leaders, the elders, the young people, the women. Now, we could not carry all those people to the Electoral Commission boardroom.
Get you, yes.
So that is, that is why this was a meeting, of course, with representation from the membership of CCEDU, but also, a manageable number that the Electoral Commission could host.
All right. And just for the sake of taking the viewers back to July when trouble actually started, let's take a look at this.
So if you think an election is a sham, if you don't believe in an election, then how are you going to make a fair report to us to improve where we may not be doing well?
That there is no way CCEDU is going to become a mouthpiece of the Electoral Commission. That is not in our mandate. We are not going to be a PR machinery of the Electoral Commission. It will never happen.
Changed now. Someone would ask that, what has changed now? Of course, trouble brewed during the Women Council election, the LC elections, and what CCEDU came out strongly to say that is, we don't support your method of voting, which was lining up between the behind the candidate that you support. But the EC came out strongly to say that we've been cautioning CCEDU since 2016, even before that. So someone would ask, if this relationship has been, frictious all through, what has changed now?
What has partly changed from yesterday's meeting is the clarity of our mandates. That CCEDU has a mandate that is given to it by the members of the coalition to observe elections independently, impartially, to conduct voter education for certain electoral milestones that we are able to, but to also rally around laws, administrative changes that bring about integrity in the electoral process. Now, what has changed from yesterday's meeting is that clarity, that when we go out to observe elections, we are not doing it on behalf of the Electoral Commission. No, we are doing it on behalf of the citizens of Uganda. And therefore, when we are reporting, we just do not report to the Electoral Commission itself, but also to the citizens of Uganda, who are our main constituency. So that level of clarity hasn't actually been there, because there's been a thinking that every time we speak about elections, we should be speaking about elections within the framework of a direct relationship with the electoral management body, which was a fair misunderstanding on, I think, well, both parts, because maybe we had not taken time to also explain that, well, we have a dual reporting mandate to the Electoral Commission and to the citizens of Uganda. Now, that is also going to be crystallized through a form of memorandum of understanding between CCEDU and the Electoral Commission, which is going to be worked on by a small team that was established yesterday, a joint task force that is comprised of both members nominated by CCEDU and also members nominated by the Electoral Commission, so that we have that level of clarity, so that we don't have this, misunderstanding, the gray areas rearing their ugly heads again in future engagements.
Most of the times when we see parties divorce or get into a frictious relationship, and then they get back to, uniting together, reconciliations, cases have been that maybe this other party has been compromised. So give us an assurance that that's not the case with CCEDU and the EC. Have you been compromised to get into this reconciliation?
Let me give my assurances to you, Mala, and to the rest of Ugandans that are watching this show. First and foremost, this is not the first time we are having an impasse with the Electoral Commission. Prior to the 2015 elections, we had a small misunderstanding about a campaign that we were running. That campaign was called Votability.
Right.
And the Electoral Commission's main point of concern with that campaign was nothing else but the word votability. That why are you using the word votability? Where is it in the Cambridge dictionary? It's not there. So why should you be using it as a rallying call for a campaign? Later on, the same Electoral Commission adopted the same word votability to promote their voter registration exercise online. Actually, up until now, they have it as their, rallying phrase on their website. Now, immediately after that, as we headed to the 2016 elections, I think you will recall that we launched a campaign called Topoa.
Right.
Which we actually worked on with the Electoral Commission, conceptualized together, launched together. Midway the campaign, the Electoral Commission comes up and says, halt your campaign, because your campaign seems to be rallying support around the opposition candidates that are involved in the election.
Wasn't that true?
Which was not true. These were impartial messages developed collaboratively between CCEDU and the Electoral Commission.
Don't you think they had an issue with the
messages-
implementation of the campaign?
There was no... The implementation modalities of the campaign were agreed upon by CCEDU and the Electoral Commission together. The launch of that Topoa campaign was done by CCEDU and the Electoral Commission together, standing on the same platform. Midway that campaign, it is halted. Why? Because now it is perceived that all these messages seem to be biased in a certain way. We said, look, we developed these messages together. There's nothing biased around these messages. So why are you banning this campaign? But we also have to understand the context within which the Electoral Commission operates. It's operating in a very, very, in an environment that is full of pulls and pressures. And there are significant pressures. And we have to admit that the Electoral Commission and the electoral, of course, the people charged with managing elections operate within a framework where there is an overbearing executive. And we have to be cognizant of that sometimes there are pressures that might be exerted upon them to make certain decisions. And we also need, those are things that may not come out within the public domain, but we have to be aware that this is the same context that we share, it's the same environment that we share. So the pressures that we sometimes potentially get entangled in could be the same pressures that the Electoral Commission also suffers. So some of those decisions that the electoral management body has made in the past may not have directly been orchestrated by they themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that there are external forces as well that come into play.
Potentially, yes.
Potentially, yes. Okay, when trouble started, the EC actually blamed you of being biased, and what they said is, why would you go to the media to tell the media and the world and the citizens of Uganda about what is going wrong in elections, as opposed to coming to us as the EC and reporting your findings or your observations on ground? So why did you use that particular direction? And with the new agreement, are there modalities on how you can report incidences that you're not comfortable with on ground?
Now, let me just clarify. There is no new memorandum of understanding yet. It's being worked on.
Right.
And it's going to be negotiated by both parties to ensure that each party retains its independence. But on coming back to your question, I think, like I've explained before, our role is to exercise scrutiny on elections. And within that frame of thought, what CCEDU does is it points out the positive lessons that we are seeing from elections, but also points out the things that may not be working well, where we'll need improvements. And I can give you assurances, Marla. When you look at some of the reports that we have pushed out, both to the Electoral Commission and to the citizens that we report to, you'll notice that I think, let's take, for the last about 1 or 2 years, ever since after the 2016 general elections, there's been reports where we have actually flagged or flashed a light on the positive things that the election management body has done to improve elections. And the headlines of newspapers have been, oh, CCEDU commends the Electoral Commission with regard to this particular by-election, and they flag those issues. Now, one interesting thing is that those are usually forgotten by our partners on the other side, to think that while CCEDU only observes, goes out to find fault, which is actually not true. We pick up the positive lessons. We also report on the things that are not going well and actually go ahead to give proposals on how those can be improved.
But the issue seemed to be who you report to. Case in study during the Women Council elections in July when trouble started. And I think we can play Jotham Taremwa's bite again, so we just clear this. Let's take a look.
So if you think an election is a sham, if you don't believe in an election, then how are you going to make a fair report to us to improve where we may not be doing well?
That there is no way CCEDU is going to become a mouthpiece of the Electoral Commission. That is not in our mandate. We are not going to be a PR machinery of the Electoral Commission. It will never happen.
Okay, so we've cut that bite short, but he went on to say that how can CCEDU go to the media to report this instead of coming to us? What's your response on that?
One, we go to the media only when we need to potentially pass a message to our main constituency, who is the citizen of Uganda. That is when we go to the media. We use the media, we use other channels.
Do you go to the media before you go to the EC, or you go to the EC first, then go to the media?
And you see, Mala, the thing is, with the Electoral Commission, there are set ways through which you have to actually report to the Electoral Commission. And you're supposed to write your report. You're supposed to then write a request to the Electoral Commission to nominate a date for you to present or submit your report. So there are steps. Yeah? But on the other hand, we also have to recognize that elections are extremely dynamic processes. That when an election is happening, there are things that occur every other minute, Let me give you an example and a question of what value would it add for you as an observer in a particular election to watch violence going on, for you to watch elections, malpractices happening at a polling station, and you do not flag these immediately, and you just document them in your report and go to sit in a boardroom with the Electoral Commission 3, 4, 5 months later to say at such and such a polling station, vote rigging happened for this length of time. What value would that add? Why not flag that immediately to the Electoral Commission and to the other stakeholders so that it can be fixed there and then? And what I'm talking about is actually not hypothetical. We have seen these incidents in real life. One time, an incident broke out during the Aru North by-election. I think that was early last year, where there was political party supporters from different sides. They met at a trading center and started fixing themselves. They started fighting themselves. And there was no police, there was no Electoral Commission official, there was no, local council official. there were EC-CCEDU observers. We quickly took images of the brawl, went to the next police post, reported the issue. Police intervened immediately. Now, of what use would it have been for us to see that fight where people are going to potentially lose their lives and then say we are documenting it in our report and then we will present it to the election
But you see,
commission?
that was different. You went to the police post. You actually reported to the right people. What the EC, I think, was against is you going to the media. We've seen countries get into chaos during election period just because other stakeholders who observe the same processes run to the media to report issues that they've seen going wrong on ground, and that has erupted chaos in the country. So maybe the EC was coming from a point of, fine, you have seen this, but use the correct angle. Pay attention to the issue of the electorate not being mature enough. They could hear what you're saying. It could be true, but the consequences of that.
You know, Mala, I hear you loud and clear. But then again, we have to recognize that when we go out to report, we cannot, well, the electoral, let me first credit the Electoral Commission. They have hotlines where you have to report these issues during an election. And many times, their senior staff who are managing a particular electoral process, they're always at hand to sort of respond to these queries. But I will tell you one thing. The interest in these elections and what goes on in these elections does not only lie with government institutions and agencies. It does not only and exclusively lie with the Electoral Commission, with the Uganda Police, with, you know, it's not just the government agencies. Actually, the biggest stakeholders in elections are citizens. So, for you to keep citizens abreast of what is happening in an impartial and biased manner is important. But I also hear you when you say that in terms of reporting, you do not want to go out and report incidents that could potentially scare away voters from participating in an election. That's not what we want. And we remain very sensitive to those scenes that could potentially have that effect of keeping citizens off the elections. Whenever we come out to convey messages to our citizens, to the citizens of this country. So we remain sensitive to that. We really recognize that it is not in the best interest of the country, of the electoral process, to keep citizens away, to scare them away. Actually, we condemn intimidation, we condemn threats, we condemn anything, yes, that will scare citizens away from elections. So we cannot be again the same people who are pushing out messages, reports that are actually going to either create violence, incite violence, keep people away from elections, or instigate electoral malpractices. No, we don't. And we have maintained that line very, very clearly and delicately.
Okay, so what are we likely to see in the coming days now that this, meeting was held yesterday? What are we likely to see, especially now that we have elections coming up in Busia next month?
Well, I think what we're going to see is that we are now going to enter the full operation phase. We are now going to go back to the optimum. And we are going to be present in the forthcoming elections that are going to be conducted. We're going to deploy observers. We're going to conduct voter education campaigns. Because, Mala, let me also put this in context, that if you have noticed the trend, the interest in elections has greatly reduced. The interest in participating in electoral processes has greatly reduced.
Correct.
But the interest in running for elective offices has actually increased.
True.
Now that is the most interesting thing. And why is that so? because people want to run for elective offices as a source of income, to go to parliament and get a fat salary and have all these perks. But the people voting for those many people have actually reduced. The numbers have gone down. Why? Because they have doubts on whether actually engaging in elections will actually make a difference, plainly to say. Some people have doubts on whether when they cast their vote is counted. People have doubts whether it is actually the voters, the people that are voted for, that actually end up being announced. And that is why you see many times conflict, violence erupts after the announcement of election results.
Exactly.
Now, we have to be cognizant of that. That is why we are now going to step up our voter mobilization campaign, but also imploring our members, our friends on the other side, the Electoral Commission, to up their game in terms of running the elections in a professional way, in a way that gives confidence to Ugandans to actually come out and participate in those elections.
Do you also, as you come to a close, do you also man the tallying of the votes? Because I know that's where voter rigging, the rigging happens, that's where votes are stolen. Do you also man that process as you come to a close? We
observe the entire process.
Okay.
By the way, we have a comprehensive observation methodology.
All right.
That begins from pre the election, we observe during the election day, and post the election day.
So when elections are stolen and compromised, and we see by-elections, so some stakeholders like you will also stand to be blamed as well?
Well, we observe and report the more practices that potentially lead to the annulment of those elections. And that is why we end up having by-elections.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Crispin Kaheru, the CCEDU coordinator. CCEDU is the Citizens Coalition for Electoral Democracy here in the country. Keep your views coming. The hashtag is Morning at NTV. That's on Twitter. You can also stream us live and drop in your comments. NTV Uganda, that's on Facebook and YouTube pages. Morning at NTV still continues. Up next is Reality on the Ground with Andrew Chamagero.